It has been said that the world turns on unseen wheels. It churns and pivots, unrelenting cycles of growth and decay. Countless civilizations rise only to crumble and give way to successors who scuffle for centuries among the ruins beneath their great shadows. In time, even the gods leave their heavens. We now cast our gaze upon the once glorious city of Heliakon, partitioned now by the Serpentine Wall and split between the two great powers. Millennia ago, it was the heart of the Concordate, the last illustrious empire which spanned the continent. To the south, much of the city is still held in the grasp of the Great Consociate Empire, which unearthed its ruins over a century before to claim their imagined birthright. The north, conversely, is claimed by the Unfettered League, a nation founded long ago by the dispossessed, wretched, destitute and unfavored masses fleeing the fall of the Concordate. And beneath this glorious divided edifice, relics, trinkets, weapons and monsters, the leavings and refuse of a long-dead culture. The Great Consociate seeks to recreate the splendor, grandeur and power of the old empire, casting itself in the leading role of this relentlessly repeating play. The Unfettered League, in contrast, yearns to create a new world from the scrapings of the old, ignoring the lessons of the past, and so err in ways both ancient and modern. The uneasy truce which led to the partitioning of the city over 20 years ago, after both great powers had ground to a bloody halt following some of the highest casualties in living memory, is a fragile thing, and each day it feels closer to reaching a new breaking point. Will Heliakon be the birthplace of something new, or will it remain the same as it ever was? A grave for empires.
Welcome to Mythtakes Happen. This is season 1 of a world-building podcast where two good friends talk about the partitioned city of Heliakon, a living, breathing world for you to game in, live in, and explore. I'm Chris, a Victorian teacher and writer.
He, of course, means from the state of Victoria, not from the Victorian era. Hi, I'm Aaron, a professional game master from South Australia.
We will begin with Ready, Setting, Go, where we discuss significant aspects of the setting, followed by Fable Fodder, where each host has developed setting and story aspects of a fantasy world without the interference or knowledge of the other host.
After, we take a short break, imperceptible to you, the listener, through the magic of technology, and return with World War words, weaving together connections, linking our two halves together, and perhaps altering some fundamental aspect of one another's contributions.
No tears, my friend. We will ruin this world together. At the end, we move to jumping to conclusions, where we discuss the whys and hows of our whats.
Look in the episode description for follow-up materials, trigger warnings, and anything else that might matter. Supplementary aids will be linked here, including summaries of our work so far, alternate takes, and GM tips, all eventually culminating in a deliciously attractive PDF at the end of the season's run.
For a few episodes, you may hear us referring to the podcast using a different name, but this is a false memory implanted in your brain by the podcast industry. Pay it no heed. Before we begin, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of this great land. I am recording on the land of the Kulin Nation, home to the Boonwurrung people.
And I'm recording this on the land of the indigenous Ghana people of the Adelaide Plains.
And with that, we'll get started. Hello everybody, it's us, Aaron and Chris. So today we are going to try for an episode of that thing that we do that has a name.
Mistakes were made.
Yeah, I did it. I knew that. Aaron, before we get started, you had some questions that you thought would be a good good thing to have at the start of this recording.
I did indeed. For you see, normally in Ready, Setting, Go, we would be discussing our thoughts from the previous episode. But given this is episode 1, we don't have any. So I thought to inquire and investigate, perhaps even within myself, what we, you and I, that is, of course, are bringing into our fable fodder for Heliakon.
I think that's a great way to start.
In the grim darkness of the 21st century, there is only Ready, Setting, Go.
Would you like to get us started?
I would be unutterably delighted. Starting off with, what fiction were you inspired by and keeping in mind when you're coming up with your various fable fodders?
Okay, well, I do think this is a good question. It's one that I don't think I have really very consciously considered as I was writing down notes for this episode and next episode. One of the first things that I'm definitely going to talk about today is magic. Yeah, that's something that I'm really interested in, and I'm going to talk about the nature of magic in our setting. And here my inspiration comes from other fiction in which magic as a force is kind of dangerous, and it's not something that can be easily harnessed in an industrial sort of way, like perhaps in the setting of Eberron.
Yes.
Like for me, and I think for a lot of people, and possibly for you, I'm not sure, when we were growing up, is kind of a lot of these iconic ideas came from things like Warhammer Fantasy, right? Like magic there is inherently corruptive, or like for something more modern, maybe. I don't know if you've read these, but have you read the Laundry Files by Charles Stross?
I have not, but this sounds interesting.
Yeah, so it's kind of like a office-based Call of Cthulhu. But in that setting, what happens is magic is something that's accessed by opening a hole to an alien dimension, essentially. So it's something that is going to be dangerous, it's going to be costly in some way. How do you deal with that? Now, it can make you powerful potentially, but you're always, there's that cost-benefit calculation that you're making there.
Norrell and Strange sort of idea as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a really good example as well, isn't it? And like when it comes to gaming, I really dig the vibe of a lot of the like old school revival type games, like White Hack, Dungeon Crawl classics. I don't know if you've ever looked into those, but they emphasize how like volatile and how hard won sorceress power might be. They play with like the archetypes of Dungeons and Dragons, the sort of bare bones ideas of what people remember playing back then, which I think also is a lot in the modern age. It's probably a lot. What's a good way of saying this?
Modern D&D is a good deal more balanced than the original.
Yeah, it's a good deal more. Yeah, it's a good deal more balanced. So, like something I'm not looking at here is making magic particularly balanced, right? Like that's something I'm interested in. How about you?
Me? Oh my gosh, I had no idea to ask. It's interesting because the first thing that leapt into my mind when I was hunting around in my noggin for, inspirations and places to hook into was a book series that you got me into, in fact.
Oh, really?
Yes, The Deathgate Cycle by Weiss and Hickman.
The Deathgate Cycle. Yeah. So with the Sartans and the Patrons and the Mensch. Yeah.
But more interestingly, that it was a world that sort of had some sort of harmony, but it had broken up into all these various different sections. Now, it's much higher fantasy than we intend to do with Heliakon and its surrounds. But this idea of a perfect system that is now in ruins, and now people are living in it and forming new societies forced together by circumstance and finding these ancient magics and not really sure what to do with them. So that was my first sort of like grip into the subject.
That makes a lot of sense. I see that actually, yeah. Oh, I have not thought about that series for a very long time. Perhaps I should do a reread.
It's one of the series that I'm still trying to actually collect the entire bloody series, because I've got nearly half. I think I've got half of them. Other sort of inspirations were Sanderson's Mistborn series, because it's got that dark element that's not edgy.
That interesting but weirdly sexless setting.
Yes.
I think that was a criticism that I heard sort of directed at all of his writing, which I agree with, but I also find it quite enjoyable, I don't think.
I don't require anybody to Game of Thrones up my things, especially since I'm not a big fan of Game of Thrones. There's a real thing for our listeners.
Oh my god. I hope this doesn't lose us listeners, because Game of Thrones, famously the best book series that's ever been completed. Oh wait, no, hold on. That guy is still doing anything other than finishing his books.
Yeah, as far as I can tell, going to conventions. So, aside from that, perhaps the weirder ones would be the, for some reason, I've just quite wanted to bring some of the imagery of the old Harryhausen fantasy films in. You're like your Sinbads and similar.
Ah, okay, yeah.
And the original Clash of the Titans, just because they were strange and deeply unsettling to very young Aaron. And we're sort of going for that with Heliakon. And finally, The Man from U.N.C.L.E., the film. I never watched the TV series.
The Man from U.N.C.L.E. I have absolutely there's no pictures coming into my head.
It's set in Berlin post-war, when we've got the Berlin Wall in there, and there's an American agent and a Russian agent, and they work together. The film's a great deal of fun. I highly recommend it.
No, I'll take a look.
Would you like to ask me the next question, or shall I just continue asking questions so we go back and forth?
You can continue asking questions.
Right,
I like your badger-like voice.
Thank you. Sure.
You're welcome. Remember, I told you that I think of you not as a person, but as an educated badger.
That's right, you did. And I took it as the high compliment that it clearly was meant as.
Badgers are so cool. You know, in the old country, badgers actually were quite dangerous. I remember as a child reading in the newspaper that a badger killed a child that had wandered into the woods. Yeah, and all adults were like, don't wander into the woods. And I was like, where's the woods? Very far away, I think.
Next question. What about other inspirations? So outside of fiction, any images or history or people?
I think that one is a bit of a shorter one because obviously, like you were just saying, the Berlin Wall is an inspiration for this city, the partition of Germany. I am quite interested in exploring how the two halves of Heliakon developed differently under the influence of those occupying forces. Well, one occupying force and one not. I suppose it's something that interests me a lot because it's a kind of balance between the fantastical kind of stuff that we do and sort of more down-to-earth realities that define day-to-day life. We talked a little bit about families being split, like in Germany, like in North and South Korea, like in so many places and times in the world. And what a toll that can take on, personally on people, on a culture, how that can change a culture's perceptions of, I suppose, other cultures,
Yeah.
And yeah, that's just something I hope that we talk about a bit more in the future.
Neat. Well, for myself, again, it's hard to avoid the associations with the post-war Berlin. For me, historically, one of the more interesting things I was thinking of was the Europe after the fall of the Western Roman Empire.
Ooh,
because
fascinating. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, the fall of the original sort of old Heliakon and then the successor cultures and groups that came out of that and are now sort of re-inhabiting it, it has that sort of feel to it.
Yeah, a faded glory of the past that has been found again and it's taken on a new meaning.
Yes, it gets mythologized and changed through modern eyes. And that was such a fascinating thing during that medieval period. The other thing was I did sort of actually have an image. There's a reason I actually put images in that. And it was not a picture that I found. It's just while I was working on Heliakon, it came to me this notion that it's sort of a corpse that's now teeming with new life. It's ugly and strange, but it's also beautiful.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, I like that.
So I'm not normally much of an image thinker, but it just sort of struck me, and I was like, yeah, that's a good description for Heliakon, so I'm going to just keep that in my brain.
Yeah, that's a good one. I like that.
All right. Well, final question for ready, setting, go. Did you have any principles that you adhered to when you're coming up with your stuff?
I think I did. My principles here were very broad, right? We want to create something that is gameable, right? As well as a kind of reality in which realistically, or whatever that means, stories can be told. So it's not up to us to exhaustively portray every part of this setting. I want to leave dark corners there for people to fill in themselves, That's something that I've always appreciated about various fiction that I have enjoyed in the past. I'm going to talk about Warhammer again, because Warhammer 40,000 this time, and something that made me think of the Horus Heresy.
Yes.
When we first got into Warhammer, the Horus Heresy was this kind of mythological thing that happened in the past. A lot of competing accounts of what actually happened. It had this weight of millennia to it. I recall reading as a child in that 3rd edition rulebook, all the stuff about it and how it felt very mythological. And then Games Workshop created 30K as a setting, as a gameable setting, as a narrative that they had to put out however many books for, 1 million books. And inside of those books, some of which were quite good. Some, yeah. The First Heretic, that's a good one.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the only one I remember that I enjoyed, actually. But yeah, like, the more of it that came out, the less mysterious the Horus Heresy became. And also because they had a broad sort of view of what they wanted to happen, and they had like specific events that they had to hit, and it was all by very different authors. You get this kind of like weird inconsistency where in 40K, when the Emperor is first described, he's this, larger than life figure, plans within plans sort of guy. And then when you read those books, it's sort of like, he's a big dummy. Why is he doing these stupid things? Right? Like it kind of takes the cloak of this happened so long ago, we have no idea. This is exciting and interesting, but we'll never know the full story, to, yes, now every single event has been filled in. We have ticked the boxes. This is how Sanguinius was. This is how Lehman Russ talked. These are the mistakes that the Emperor made, know?
Yeah, I do. And it's funny, I didn't originally agree with you, but as they've gone on, and especially as they've reintroduced the Primarchs, the setting, I realised just how much it's the meeting your heroes effect.
That's what it is, yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
How about you?
So, not a lot of, like, hard principles, but I did want to make something that was reminiscent of, but distinct from classic medieval fantasy.
Fair enough.
So, whenever I thought, like, am I just falling into old traps and ideas, cliches, tropes? I was like, is there a reason to twist them? Like, sometimes tropes are there because they do make our lives and our reading and our understandings easier. And if there was any reason at all to twist it. And the other principle, I suppose, was that since spirals and reoccurring things are a big theme of this season, I wanted to make sure that I was just kept in mind that this is the product of successive generations of culture sort of coming together, rising, falling, coming together, rising, falling, and go for a real melange of people.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that sounds very good to me.
All right. Well then, shall we continue with Fable Fodder?
We should continue with Fable Fodder.
In the grim darkness of the 21st century, there is only Fable Fodder.
Shall I go first?
I would insist that you go first.
It's because I asked in advance. So first, I want to talk about magic and the nature of magic. Of course, this is all up for debate later on. Well, what is magic anyway? Some seem to have it, many seek to use it. Few ever really master it. So magic is a reality in this setting, but it is both dangerous and costly. It is often thought that elder civilizations long time ago had mastered it or wrested its power from the gods, sort of leading to our cyclical pattern of gods and cultures and ideas thriving and dying in our world. And whether this is true is certainly up for debate, for the world is many ages old and much esoteric knowledge has been lost. That boom and collapse cycle is not conducive in particular to the preservation of lore, which by the nature of the magical processes is held captive by sort of very secretive groups and mystery cults and things like that. This leads me to the topic of the state of magic in Heliakon and beyond. Magic in its fundamental forms is not a natural part of this world.
Interesting. So it's not natural.
It is not natural. It's something that kind of exists in parallel to it, right? It's a power that kind of runs beneath the thin skin of our reality, but it does not spill over without interference, without willpower. So if people had not discovered its existence, then it simply would not interact with the world at all, except in possibly very rare circumstances. So like there is a connection between our two realities because obviously magic does exist and it is able to affect our world, but that connection is something that has to be made. You have to make that connection. It does not naturally exist, right?
Right.
This is done through two processes, one ancient and one modern, both of which are difficult and costly in different ways. The first is meat and blood. So to harness the power of magic, it was once said, a great crime must be perpetrated here in the natural world. So in the deep past, when the people of of these lands were sort of little more than beasts. It seems that sacrifices and murders and horrible things like that were the way to gain magical power, right? It created these savage power dynamics in the primordial world. And it's speculated that much that is wrong today is a direct result of these uncivilized acts of violence. In general, very few places in the world use this method anymore. It is not subtle, it is crude, and most of all, it is wasteful. Draining the blood of 100 victims to fuel your unnatural might is in the long run an unsustainable practice. Which brings me to the second process, which is an innovation of the modern age and partly contributor to the success of the Great Consociate. Over 150 years ago, the mineral known as wraith quartz transformed the practice of magic.
Wraith quartz.
Wraith quartz.
Oh, I love this.
It is still both costly and dangerous, but in a significantly different way. Using wraith quartz, a skilled practitioner does not need to maim or murder or exsanguinate a victim. During sorceress rituals, a wizard is able to use other living people, never animals. It has to be a thinking
sapient
creature, as conduits through which to pull raw magical power from its own realm and sequester it within a properly prepared wraith quartz fragment. The more people are involved in the process, the more energy can be sent through. In this way, the people act as a kind of channel as well as a filter for magic. Those parts which are able to harm, corrupt, or otherwise inconvenience the practitioner are for the most part held at bay, and the ritual can proceed more soundly. The magic is then safely channeled through the wraith quartz itself. However, I have 4 ideas here that I'm just going to leave up for debate and leave up for...
Oh, yeah, man.
Right?
Drop them and we'll have a good chat in World War words about it.
Absolutely. So, the first is that wraith quartz is either destroyed or greatly diminished somehow after use. And its mining, which was once a flourishing industry, it has become increasingly dangerous as people have to delve either deeper and deeper or in more and more isolated places. In the Great Consociate, people used for the purposes of channeling tend to be recruited from the underclasses of society. However, it is seen as a great kindness by the upper levels of the Consociate because it gives them something useful to do.
I am going to ask, is there any effects on the people who are used to filter magic into wraith quartz?
Of course! That's where my next point comes in.
Oh, goody.
Being filters, the ill effects of magic eventually leave their mark on them. Psychological, physical, and supernatural. Sort of the scope of that is something I'd love to discuss a little later.
Yeah.
And for my last one is just a very, very vague one. This is all seen quite differently in the Unfettered League, though in what way I have not quite defined yet. That's it. That's it for that one.
I love it.
Yeah?
All right, yeah, this gives us some really good bones to build a unique magic system from. I'm excited.
I enjoyed this one. I have another one. I have another contribution to our...
Another bale of hay in the fable fodder? Let's not go with that.
Another bale of hay. Hey, hey, hey. It's Fat Albert. I don't know. Why did they call Fat Albert Fat Albert? Is it just because he was fat? I don't think that's nice.
No, but Bill Cosby wasn't, in fact, very nice at all, so that's not a big surprise.
What? What happened? Oh, actually, before I start this, I want to define a new term, if possible.
Oh, yes, please do.
So you said that one of the ideologies that are at play here is Reconstructionism, right?
Mm-hmm.
This idea that actually, the past was better and brighter than the present, and only by recreating the concordant civilization can the world see its glory repeated.
Yeah.
I want to add the opposite term, right?
Yes.
Like the opposite ideology. And I thought of a word, luminarchism.
Right.
I was thinking of luminarch, right? I
Yes.
wanted to get this idea of like luminary, luminarch, but also have this subversive sound to it, like anarchist.
No, I like it. I see what you're going. And yeah, because luminarchy, it really works. Like,
luminarchy, yeah.
And you can be a luminarchist, but luminarchism, that works.
Luminarchism. Yeah. Okay, maybe luminarchism. Yeah, okay. Let's go for this one. I have a title for this one, which is called Music of the Dead.
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun. I want to focus on a particular district of the Northern Partition, an area called Melodwynn. It rests at the very edges, the borders of this side of the city, and it is here where we are going to start our journey. The Unfettered League has occupied this territory for over 20 years, and the city has been transformed by their presence. This area in particular became a kind of refuge to members of the underground Luminarchist movement in the south. Because during the invasion, during the war, many gave their aid to the, invading or liberating, depending on your political stance, army. And at the same time, many true believers in the Consociate's imperial doctrines fled to the south. And of course, those who had no real choice in the matter or means to leave remained behind. Let's talk about Melodwynn. Melodwynn is known across the city as the place where living musicians go to practice and perfect their craft. I say living here because the culture of the city has always been more interested in the music of the dead. While alive, it was thought that a musician's creations are actually tainted by the vices of desire and pride. Pride in their work and a desire to be recognized for it. Bards, composers, and artists of most types are actually looked down upon in Heliakon, with a mixture of pity and disgust. Everyone knows music is only good once the creator is no longer in the world of the living.
No pop stars in Heliakon, then?
No pop stars. No Hatsune Miku. In death, the music of many composers is at last cleansed of the context of the living world and able to be enjoyed in a pure form. To this end, a complicated form of necromancy called symphomortology is practiced by the secretive Guild of Conductors. They are able, through sorcerous means unknown to outsiders, channel the music of dead musicians into a form audible to an audience. The Guild is the wealthiest organization in the generally impoverished Melodwynn, known for taking orphans off the streets and training them in the arts of their profession, though how, nobody knows. The apprenticeships are long, and members of the guild are unforthcoming with details. Rumours abound that many of those children rescued from the streets never make it out alive, but there has never been any real proof of this. It's just something people say. The district of Melodwynn has only in the last decade connected to the city proper by the urban sprawl and shanty towns which formed shortly after the last great conflict. The roads have remained unpaved until the current year, when it was decided that all who dwell in North Heliakon should have the dignity afforded to them by citizenship in the Unfettered League, and that pride in the community is something which should be encouraged in all levels of society. The more cynical inhabitants of Melodwynn suspect a policy of gentrification to further push the largely undesirable living musicians from the more popular parts of North Heliakon, while others welcome this way of connecting at last with other districts. Others still note that road building and infrastructure are the soft power methods in which the Unfettered League seeks to tighten its grasp on the city.
Right. I'm fascinated with this. This is not only another example of magic being a very strange thing in Heliakon, but it's a really interesting take on a bit of normal culture.
Yeah, I had this idea because I was thinking that magic is used in our society somehow, right? And it is used in some ways, but it is mysterious and it is dangerous, and we can surmise that whatever is happening in Melodwynn or whatever is happening in this guild of conductors, it's probably not great, or there are some downsides to it. But I also thought that the effect of producing music from dead musicians or their essence or something like that is a very light effect, right? Yes. This by itself does not have a huge impact on society. So
it's
I envision
magic,
that.
So the cost can be equally small?
Quite possibly, right? I had the notion that perhaps necromancy itself is not something that is common at all, or is even thought that it is possible. I'm not sure about that. I think that's something that we can discuss later on.
Agreed.
But this symphomortology is a practice that is adjacent to whatever necromancy could be. That's all.
I'm also interested to see and play with how to make that work with a bard-like class.
Yeah. I think that's an interesting one too. I think I've talked for almost 15 minutes, so I'll leave it at that for now. What do you reckon?
I reckon that sounds good. I'm going to begin with the Brazen Dome. In the north side of Heliakon, there is a vast open plaza with one of the most remarkable and easily visible oddities in the ancient metropolis. An enormous hemisphere of decorated brass-like material lies in the exact centre of the paved square, refulgent with reflected sunlight. 200 metres in diameter, with a surface entirely embellished with interlocking hexagons with a 6-pointed star within each. The metal substance might appear to be brass, but most assuredly it is not, as all attempts to damage it have not caused scratch nor blemish. The Brazen Dome has a peculiar habit that has caused it to become the focal point for much of the Unfettered League's artifact industry. At irregular intervals, and with no notice at all, the dome rises with a barely perceptible vibration and reveals a door to the many layers of old Heliakon beneath. Despite the Brazen Dome seeming to be one piece and never appearing to revolve, the door does not appear in the same place each time it rises, and the door leads to wildly different areas of the Undercity depending on where it opens on the dome. Complicating the efforts of those who would use the door in the Brazen Dome, when it rises is very irregular, and despite much research into the matter, none have been able to predict when it will rise or where its door will be. Further, how often it rises varies wildly. Sometimes the door will be revealed a couple of times a day, and rarely the dome doesn't rise for an entire week. Normally, if such a term can be used at all, it reveals its door every day or two. Adding to these complications is that it only rises for a total of 1 minute at a time, and given the size of the dome, even if you and your party are ready to go when it begins to rise, it's only barely possible to reach the door if it is on the far side of the dome. If one has to gather one's pack and one's party, it's quite impossible to make it, which doesn't stop some from sliding in at the last second, and grisly tales of those that didn't quite make it are often told to first-time delvers.
That's great. I really like that. I'm getting a very clear image in my head from this one.
Good. Well, I'm going to expand a little bit because the Brazen Dome is not alone in its big plaza. It is surrounded by the Brightmarket.
Ooh, the Brightmarket. I like the sound of that.
Cool. So the kilometre square plaza around the Brazen Dome is nearly entirely concealed by a colourful patchwork of cloth used by the merchants to protect their stalls and small homes from the reflected glare of the Brazen Dome. The glare from the dome increases the temperature in the area by as much as 10 degrees, and the dazzling brilliance of the light can blind the unwary, although admittedly not for very long. Despite this, the presence of adventurers and delvers are waiting to descend into the Brazen Dome, and many of them returning with items, materials, and research, has led to a thriving economy in supplying those brave fools and buying what they bring back. Now, the balance of power in Brightmarket is in constant flux, with no group truly managing to control this most lucrative of delver entrances in the quarter. The Unfettered League only cares to take its taxes and keep the bloodshed down, staying deliberately blind to the machinations of groups like the Gallon Goblin Clan, the Patchwork Gang, the Brass Merchants Guild, and the local Lodge of Snakes, which are all groups that I would like to explore in later episodes, or perhaps you might come up with some notions during World War Words.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds fascinating. I really love the sound of that.
Well, I'm going to take us away from the north side in Heliakon, and I would like to discuss what's in the middle.
Oh, I love this because I struggled a little with that, so I would love to hear your take.
Well, thank you, because I was immediately inspired when we started discussing this zone between the two and how that would work.
The way you started describing it with the delvers and such, it did calcify in my head what this might be like.
Oh, well, I wonder if we're on the same page then, because I'm going to introduce you to the notion of the Interbellum Guard of the Serpentine Wall.
Okay, I like it. I mean, that's a good name.
Interbellum's just a fun word, isn't it?
Yes.
When the ceasefire was called more than 20 years ago, and Heliakon was divided into its two halves by the twinned fortifications that would quickly be called the Serpentine Wall, this raised multiple problems, two of which were found to be solutions to each other. First, there are thousands of mercenaries on both sides of the conflict that were going to be suddenly without employment for an indeterminate amount of time. Second, the space between the mirrored barriers would need to be patrolled by a force that would not favour either side, since neither the Unfettered League nor the Great Consociate wanted the mercenaries to leave in search of work in case they were needed again in a hurry, especially not if the bulk of them found work in each other's territory and further destabilise this newborn and very fragile balance of power. So, as part of what is known as the Bloody Bloody Avenues Agreement, each power both equally funds the Interbellum Guard of the Serpentine Wall. This created a buffer between the two nations, allowed the mercenaries to stay where they would be needed when the truce inevitably ended, and ensured the skills of the fighters stayed sharp. But no one expected the arrangement to last as long as it had, and the Serpents, as they have come to be known, have become a small but potent power block of their own, the one most invested in the ongoing truce.
Oh, that's very interesting. I like that because this definitely sets up this power balance and how it has been maintained for so long as well.
Yeah, I think there's a line from a novel somewhere that the tripod is the most unstable of political organizations.
That's right. Tell that to the Greens.
Am I right?
Funny Australian political joke.
It's very, very relevant, and I'm sure everybody will be able to get it. I do have one final piece, and I think I've still got a couple of minutes left in my fable fodder to have a crack at it.
I think you most probably do, yes.
Well, given that I've had a bit of a chat about the North and the Unfettered League, something about the middle, I thought I might introduce you to somebody, an important somebody, on the southern side, controlled by the Great Consociate. I'd like to introduce to you Azil Juventus, blood heir to the second Connacht of Heliakon.
Wow, okay, cool.
So, the half of Heliakon and its surrounding area is administered for the Great Consociate by the traditional pair of Connachts. The second Connacht recently lost their blood heir to assassination by parties unknown, and thus the position has recently been filled by that killed individual's son, Azil Juventus. It must be said that this did not meet with much initial enthusiasm, as the young man had previously considered to be abrasive and arrogant, even by his noble-born peers, and you can imagine just how arrogant you have to be for the other nobles to think you're arrogant. Yet, he seems to have truly steadied since his father's demise, and so his past is quickly being set aside, blamed on the follies of youth. They would not be so quick to do so if they knew that Azil is the assassin responsible.
Ooh, juicy.
So perhaps one should blame his tutor, for it is she who filled his head with the tales of the old Concordate, the way his bloodline can be traced back to it, and the burden of greatness this lays upon him. And as the boy grew and the promise of his eminence grew within his mind, he became increasingly haughty, imperious, and cruel. Many servants were discharged with injuries, and twice as many so to save them from receiving one. Only his parents and tutor were free from his growing malice. And it was the tutor that gifted the young Azil Gentis, on the occasion of his ascent to manhood, an ancient dagger said to have been carried by a Concordate ruler. Azil has taken this to be the final sign that he would ascend to the highest position within the Great Consociate, before reforming it into the Concordate under him and returning the world to glory. Perhaps he's right. The line between majesty, magic, and madness is thin indeed.
He could do it. I believe in him.
Yeah, we should all believe in ourselves and each other, right?
We should, absolutely. Ooh, that's it. I think we both did a good job here.
Yeah.
We should now take some time for World War words.
In the grim darkness of the 21st century, there is only World War words.
World War words? World War words.
Yeah. And I think I'm going to go with Water on one of these things, so I'm looking forward to this.
Ooh, okay. Interesting. Okay, who should go first? Do you want to go first, perhaps?
Well, no, you went first with the fable fodder, so we'll keep the pattern and you go first.
Okay, we can do that. Okay, the first part of... I don't think I'm really going to war with you too much in this one, but I do have a bit of an addition to your Interbellum Guard of the Serpentine Wall.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I'm interested in this. Let's see how it goes. So,
sure.
The Interbellum Guard is a slowly but steadily growing power block in the middle of the great powers, but it could not have become such by accident. Its significance and rise to prominence were engineered by one woman, an elf named Stola Tamda. Stola once headed the wealthiest mercenary company in the area, named the Tamda 12. The 12 were an elite squad of adventurers, thieves, codebreakers, and archaeologists, with an interest in bringing up the leavings of the Concordate and selling it to the highest bidder, as most mercenary companies are.
Yeah.
This all changed when they unearthed an artifact called the Gauntlet of the Western Woods, or at least that's what the closest translation they could come up with for the overly flowery language that was carved into this great glove. And it was a colossal thing. It was easily as big as a human or an elf. It was a great golden fist with these red veins of some precious stone running through it.
Okay.
It thrummed with power. Like, there was definitely something in it. You know when you're in a room that is full of electrical equipment? That's what it felt like.
That sort of subliminal hum.
That's right. Properly studied, it's possible that it could have turned the tide of this current war. From casual examinations, it appeared that there was a great deal of some kind of energy that was stored inside of it, ready to be unleashed. How? No one knew. Who could have wielded it is up for debate. And some have suggested it may be an artifact of the godly powers of the past. In any case, Stolar and her crew brought this to the Unfettered League. They felt that the Unfettered League would probably be the ones to use it most responsibly, whatever that means. I think at the time they were thinking probably they would get the most money out of it. At the news of this great discovery, they were even invited into the ruling chambers of the Unfettered Council itself, a great honor, with the expectation of an almost unbelievable reward. But things did not go smoothly at all. Stolar Tamda watched her companions murdered in the chambers, set upon by the Unfettered League's most skilled soldiers. It was only by some kind of luck that she escaped with her life, although she lost an eye and her left dominant hand in the altercation. And the gauntlet? Well, the Tamda 12 were not foolish, or at least not that foolish. They didn't bring it with them, but instead hid it beneath the earth in a secured location to be safely handed over after negotiations had concluded. Stolar immediately returned to this place, and as far as anyone knows, vanished from the world for a period of several years. Really, she didn't re-emerge. Stolar Tamda returns 2 years later, but under an assumed name. That's Strata Westwood. She's unrecognizable. Her face and flesh are covered in bright red veins, which appear to glow every now and then. She wears an eye patch, but her hand has been replaced by a small articulated golden prosthetic. She has worked very hard to play the Great Consociate and the Unfettered League against one another. She has a plan. She helped found the Interbellum Guard. She has a plan. She has come to understand the nature of the betrayal at the council chambers in some context, and why the Unfettered League specifically would commit such an act in the first place. But she's still plotting. She will see it through for the sake of her dead companions. And when she does, Heliakon will be one city again. What's left of it anyway.
Oh, yeah.
That's just a bit of an addition, I thought.
I like that. I like that. So I'd place that event where she goes to the Unfettered Council 2 years before the truce.
So absolutely. That's kind of what I meant, yeah.
Yeah. So when she returns to the city, it's a city in the midst of putting together this truce, and they're looking for, there's all these different competing mercenary groups that are now going to be sort of jammed together into this Interbellum Guard. And there's this, assumed identity, but she's clearly knows what she's doing, and she finds a way to rise to the top of that group and, yes, become the administrator, the commander of the Guard.
The captain, maybe, yeah. Something like that, yeah.
And I definitely think that there is something buried in the no man's land, whether it's the gauntlet or whatever remains of it or something that she's secreted there.
Definitely. So that was my idea for that one.
I love it. Really do.
Now, am I just doing all of mine and then you do all of yours?
Oh, I don't know.
That how we're going?
Did you want to go back and forth?
Yeah, maybe back and forth. Go. You do one.
Look, this is where I'm going to challenge you.
Okay, challenge me. I need to be challenged.
Oh, good. Because you said there's no such thing as natural magic. That magic is on the other side of this thin skin, and it only permeates the real world through will. Well, I'm going to say that's not entirely true. That there are, in fact, two natural forms of magic. That the most common form of natural magic is life. Life itself is an expression of magic.
Ooh, okay.
That is why the sort of first use of more sort of explicit magic is from blood and meat. It is simply that thin skin between reality and magic is thinnest beneath a person's skin.
Huh. Fascinating. I like that very much.
So it's poorly understood, and perhaps only the most puissant of wizards and arcanists understand that life itself is a form of an expression of magic. To the average hoi polloi, life is just life, and magic is what scary wizards do.
Yes, scary wizards. I am terrified of wizards in my everyday life as a teacher. So
only fair. The other form of natural magic is wraith quartz itself. It's connected to life.
Okay.
As life is magic, whenever life enters the world and leaves it, it does through via that membrane between reality and magic. And when it does that, it causes a reaction in the earth, either around or beneath that action. So birth and death, these transcendent and wonderful and beautiful and terrifying acts of magic slowly, in generally minuscule amounts, cause the formation of wraith quartz.
Okay, yep, that works for me.
All right. So naturally, of course, if you're young and vibrant and so forth, you leave a little bit more. If you're sort of old and running out of life, you leave very little. And if somebody has already done some ancient magics and used your blood and flesh to cast a spell, you're going to leave very little magic behind.
That's very interesting. Yeah, I like that very much.
Now, that process is probably understood by some of the older civilizations, the Concordate, but it is yet undiscovered by the Great Consociate and the Unfettered League.
Oh, these guys are so dumb.
They might put it together, though. But now, one of the things that you mentioned was that the Great Consociate discovered the use of wraith quartz, and I would say that they knew about wraith quartz because in their homeland, when they went mining, they found lots of wraith quartz, a huge trove of it, because the original sort of heartland of the Consociate used to be a prison for the Concordate.
Oh, okay.
And so was the site of countless deaths. The great and noble heritage that the Great Consociate talks about, and honestly believes, was in fact born out of the governors and prison wardens of this old prison and perhaps penal colony.
Oh, incredible. And also I like the word penal because it sounds like penis.
It does. And, as Australians, of course, we have a special connection to penal colonies.
And penises.
So,
oh, that's great. Yeah. I think that works really well.
So they already had a bunch of wraith quartz hanging around, looking all sort of pretty and weird. When they discover its use, they then put their paw to use, and that is what, as you described, funded their and caused their enormous expansion and becoming the Great Consociate.
So in your view of wraith quartz, it's sort of like it's always been around in the same, and it's always been known about in the same way that, say, we knew that electricity was a thing before we could harness it.
Precisely.
Like when Benjamin Franklin invented electricity utilizing a kite, he knew that electricity existed.
Yeah.
But he didn't know that we needed kites to get it down to the earth.
I believe a key was involved as well. But yeah,
I never read that book.
That's totally fair. Mostly mythology anyway. Although, to be fair, we aren't doing mythology ourselves.
We are creating a new mythology for a new world.
I wanted to expand more on magic because obviously this was one of your bigger sections, and thus it inspires so many ideas in me.
Absolutely, yeah.
The wraith quartz beneath the original Great Consociate area is starting to tap out. They've still got a lot of it. They still have sort of worldwide the large proportion of it, but they are starting to run lower on it. However, Heliakon is one of the most ancient cities in the world. It is built on the lives and deaths of a truly staggering number of people over a staggering amount of time. And so one of the most common resources that delvers bring back from the Undercity is wraith quartz.
Oh, okay. That's really cool.
And of course, a quarter of a century ago, there was one of the biggest bloodbaths in recorded history, and perhaps even beyond. So there's a whole bunch of new wraith quartz forming down there as well.
That's really good. I like that very much. You said it was a challenge, but actually, I think this whole thing wraps it up quite neatly. I do enjoy that.
Well, I suppose the challenge was to the idea that there is no natural magic, and this is me sort of pushing back.
And the perceptions of it could vary as well, right?
Absolutely.
We're not talking about a world that's as connected as ours, where we have access to every opinion and every side of every argument.
It's why I talk about that. This is the creation of wraith quartz is a fact. It's just not a fact currently known to anybody alive.
Exactly. No, that's nice. I like that part.
So I've got a handful of little bits and pieces to go still on magic.
Sure.
The filters, the people that filter magic through into a wraith quartz.
Yes.
I think they need a better name than filter.
Filters or channelers. Yeah, definitely they need a better name.
So refiners, osmotes, purifiers. You said a word there that I really liked.
Channelers?
Channelers. Yeah, that works too.
Maybe. I'm not sure. Did you say osmotes?
Osmotes, yes.
Osmotes. I like osmotes.
Right?
I mean, yeah, that works. Yeah.
Right.
Osmotes. Yeah, let's do it.
We'll use that as our working title. I think it's a fun word. It doesn't get used enough.
It's a good word, yeah.
One of the things that you brought up for me to play with was the idea of what happens to these osmotes as they are used and used up.
Something good, right?
Yeah, totally. Awesome. I would argue that there's in fact probably a wide variety of strange and terrible things that can happen to these people, but there is a sort of common or normal effect. You can definitely imagine the big bunny quotes I'm doing there.
I'm imagining it at this very moment.
I appreciate that. This is where our common undead come from. That as they as the osmotes allow sort of magic to flow through them, bits of their own life are caught up in the flow until eventually there's nothing left of their own life. There's just this open connection to magic, which is, as we already established, also life, which leaves them not alive and not dead.
But stuck in between.
Yes. So this is where zombies, which, eventually rot into skeletons and other bits and pieces come from. They are still controllable by those who hold the wraith stone that they osmoted for, because they've still got a fragment of their self in there. So wraith quartz that's used up all its magic can still be used to command these undead. Although I'd like to call them collectively as the winnowed.
The winnowed.
Yes, as in they've been winnowed down.
Winnowed down. Makes me think of Winona Ryder, which is a great thing to think about.
Yeah, she's awesome. The last point, because you mentioned that you weren't really sure how the Unfettered League handles wraith quartz.
Yeah, I wasn't sure. I wanted to sort of leave that up for discussion.
I've got some notions. So given that the Consociate are using their poor and bordering on sort of slaves to fuel their wraithstone as osmotes, the notionally egalitarian Unfettered League obviously hates this sort of thing, at least in policy at any rate. But the reality of the war is that they were not going to be able to stand against the Consociate without utilizing wraith quartz itself. So their initial plan was to try and spread the effects out. They sort of had attacks going on that you would be an osmote once, because nothing bad can happen then. Bad things definitely happen, just rarely. But the exigencies of war doesn't really make that a tenable thing. It's far too slow. There's, everybody's spread out. You need energy now and in a certain place. So they eventually asked for volunteers. And so the people with crippling injuries or dying people, and those who just generally wanted to sacrifice themselves to their nature, would become osmotes, eventually probably becoming the winnowed. And that allowed the Unfettered League to still playing on the back foot. They had less wraith quartz, they have less osmotes than the Great Consociate does, but at least able to play on the same level.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that the League, unknown to its populace, would use criminals and prisoners of war towards the end of the last war. Although it certainly seems to me that during the ceasefire, this truce, that they've publicly stopped anything but the occasional volunteer, the dying persons, that sort of jazz, that there are individuals on the Unfettered Council who are secretly using prisoners and criminals, etc., still to charge up Wraithstone, because they want to have a stockpile ready for when hostilities resume, and it can't really be illegal since, they're the government.
Well, that's true. And possibly a political scandal in the making.
Oh, yes.
Nice.
All right. That was a lot of talking from me, sorry, but...
That was a lot of talking. God, can't believe it.
I know, right?
So sickening, really. No, I like the sound of your voice, except sometimes you sound like a robot, but it does not make its way through to the recording, which is lovely. Okay, I'm going to go next.
Yes, please do.
I've got two sort of expansions to things that you have talked about. So the first one is about the Brazen Dome. So the Brazen Dome actually is not working as intended. Think about it. Why would a great structure like this be opening doors to underground tombs and these kinds of places in the first place? Who would build such a thing? Why? Well, let me tell you. The Brazen Dome is actually an ancient civilization's failed method of trying to harness the full power of the realm of magic. It is, in a way, a very large computer, although the people who built it would not think of it in such terms. To them, the Brazen Dome was an expression of faith and a conduit for communing with their gods. This is truly lost to time, as the civilization which built it predates the Concordat itself. In those days, it was thought that gods came from the place of magic, and that if a culture was able to open those doors and allow the free flow of sorcery and divinity from one world to the other, that they could create a sort of heaven on earth, paradise for everyone, where everyone would be on the level of gods and everyone could live together in enormous comfort.
Clearly that went well.
Well, unfortunately, what actually happened was to be the almost instantaneous end of this culture. culture. One that the few archaeologists who study it refer to as the brass builders, because many of their remaining and dormant artifacts appear also to be constructed of this same material, material that no specialist, alchemist, or sorcerer has been able to replicate since. The Brazen Dome is in fact the only large structure left, and it was the only structure left there entirely before Heliakon was built around it millennia ago. The calculation of divinity, the enumeration of magic, the quantification of the unquantifiable created a kind of feedback cycle which in an instant simply erased these people and most of their other works from the world, and then it stopped. The effect of the Brazen Dome opening doorways into nearby and relatively close dungeons and caverns is sort of just an unintended side effect. After performing its one great task, its great function, it lost its supernatural calibration, if you want to call it that, and it's now simply in this kind of purposeless standby mode. The knowledge of how to even access its internal workings, if it has any, how to alter its purpose and effects, no longer exists, and if it did, would likely prove to be as much of an existential problem for our current civilizations as it did its creators.
I do love the idea that there's this critical bit of ancient artifact that's got this important usage, it's got a whole marker built around it, but it is technically a giant button that if you press it correctly will end everybody.
Correct, yes. And of course, if we're playing in this setting and if the players discover this, they will want to do that.
That is what players do, yes.
We have to, in every one of our supplementary materials, like with Yaranga, we do have to have that sidebar. So they blew up the place.
Yep, I'm okay with this. And for those who are joining us in our episode 1, if you look around, you should be able to find our pilot episode, a little self-contained story and setting about Yaranga, an Australian town of cosmic horror.
Episode 0, where we were still learning what we are now putting into practice. Well, let's see how this one sounds.
I better say, I'm not sure I'm quite ready to call myself a master of the podcast just yet.
I feel like I could call myself a master of the podcast. I don't think anyone would agree. Do you have another bit? I have one. I'm sure you have loads of bits.
Yes, I have bits.
My one remaining addition is about the Galangulp Goblin clan, but I'd like to hear what you have first, and then I'll go after. Is that all right?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. So I've got a bit here on your fascinating music of the dead, the Symphomortology.
Symphomortology, yeah.
So first things first, I'm enchanted with this notion, so much so that I am absolutely going to I'm going to make a bard specialization for the Guild of Conductors, a necro.
Yes.
I can already see the shape of it. It's going to be fun. And, when I was writing this little section, I'm going to challenge you again. There's a third kind of natural magic.
You bastard.
Fair. Art is magic as well as life. It enchants, it's illusory, it divines truth, it connects us to our ancestors. It's just like art in the really real world, it's just that it is also magic.
Allow me to just say the following. Oh my god, that is such an Aaron thing to say.
Thank you. I'll take that as the highest of compliments.
Oh, it is.
So, Symphomortology simply takes this notion that art is magic a step further in a difficult and frankly terrible way. When the Guild of Conductors takes these orphans from the street, they are taught music. They learn to listen, to play, to read and write music, because the Guild of Conductors are looking for those who are truly gifted in music and, crucially, love it. And this is crucial. Everybody delights in music to some degree, but the stronger that love for music is, the better and more powerful the conductor will be once they're fully inducted. And the process is expensive and difficult. The guild doesn't waste its time with those that would be weak. So many of the ill-regarded bards and poets, minstrels around Heliakon, were actually orphans trained in Melodwynn and simply released back into the wild, as it were, when they were found to be insufficiently gifted and so forth.
Oh, that's very cool.
Once an apprentice conductor has mastered at least one instrument and their love for music is strong, they are then inducted, or at least they attempt to induct them into the true art of Symphomortology and unlock their ability to call forth the pure music of the dead rather than defile ears with their living compositions. They are strapped to an operating table with their arms out wide and each finger separated and individually strapped down. The apprentice is given a strong, but not strong enough, pain-killing drugs and a leather strap to bite down on. As a crucial figure within the Guild of Conductors, the Finger Master carefully slices open the flesh between the knuckles and engraves on the bone the 4 forms of symphomorphology on each finger of each hand, just leaving the thumbs.
The Finger Master.
The Finger
Master. The Finger Master. The Finger Master. Sorry, I have to keep saying that. It's such a funny but also very cool name. The Finger Master.
I like it. This process is excruciating, and not everybody survives it, either from the fairly crude surgery, but mostly from the horrifying amounts of pain. I mean, these are fingers, lots of nerves. It's awful. However, survivors with the magic literally carved into their bones can now learn the gestures and the timing to summon forth ghostly music, mostly for the edification of the soul, but some of those effects have amazing and subtle magical effects. And it's really important that the new conductor comes to appreciate this, as their crippled fingers will struggle with even basic table implements, let alone a pen or an instrument they'll likely never play again.
Sad, but perhaps necessary. You think about it, if we did that in our own society, perhaps the world would be a better place.
I can name 1 or 2 musical artists that I think would be improved by never touching an instrument again, yes.
But so we don't lose listeners, don't tell us.
I shan't. So I've got a little fragment about the Luminarchists, but I'd like to hear about your Gallengulp clan.
Okay, all right, well, let's go. The Gallengulp Goblin clan. I really liked this name. It immediately leapt off the page, the digital page for me, and also out of your mouth and into my ears when you were talking about it. So thank you. The Gallengulp Goblin clan is different to most other goblin associations because it has created its own niche in Brightmarket by being open to non-grey skin races. I've called goblins grey skins instead of green skins to differentiate them from other things. Also, I see a lot of goblins that are drawn with grey skin, which I feel like is probably a more attractive colour.
Very pretty.
It's very pretty. So something deeply ingrained in many global goblin cultures is the idea that their origins are some kind of great shame to the race as a whole. The stories all vary. Some believe that they were created from the cast-off materials of the gods that they had used for other races. Some feel that their stature and awkward demeanor is a kind of divine punishment. In any case, goblins do not possess gods of their own, and either revere the ascended pantheons of dominant peoples or honor their near ancestors with small offerings and prayers. As a whole, they are small, unattractive things. They possess traits the other races find largely hideous, and they prefer to skulk in dark and physically constraining places. And goblins are, as a rule, uninterested in magic or trade with other peoples, and they have historically been looked down upon by many of the other races. They do not have a clear place in any society and are often seen as outsiders. This has made many of them rather poor by the standards of whichever societies they inhabit. The Gallengulp clan, named after their mythic founder, Garangel Gallengulp, has bucked this trend. In fact, they have inducted non-goblins into their clan by allowing them to reforge their identities as greyskins by taking part in the rebirth ritual, a semi-religious ceremony once used by goblins of this particular clan to sanctify marriages, where the couple would be reborn as a single entity in the eyes of the community. In this way, the non-goblins are joined to the Gallengulp clan. This has attracted a great many people who were down on their luck or banished from their own societies. It has also allowed the Goblin clan to improve trade relations with many other organizations, as its new members are able to act as the face of the Merchant Guild and make trade more palatable to others, while also ensuring the goblins are not disadvantaged due to racial prejudice. The Gallengulp Goblin clan is a fast-growing power in Brightmarket, although it has had some difficulty sort of reaching beyond the walls of Heliakon.
I've got 2 twists on that. First one's just to note that I like the idea that the Gallengulp Goblin clan's efforts are slowly making the prejudice against goblins, at least in the Unfettered League's northern hemisphere at least, it's ameliorating it. Like, even the other goblin clans are finding that people will talk to them on occasion, and that there's less of that going on.
I actually have a goblin friend. Do you know them?
Yeah, exactly, that sort of thing. I love it. It's important. But the big twist I want to make is actually to connect it back to your point about the Brazen Dome. The modern day goblins are the few survivors of the Brazen Dome's activation.
Ooh!
That the goblins' history that everyone believes is terrible and tainted, and not incorrectly, is they were the original designers and creators of the Brazen Dome, and they are the inheritors of the brass builders. They just do not know.
Oh, that's great. I like that. And wrapped up in a nice little package.
I sort of like the idea that maybe there's even a handful, like maybe one or two Galengulp goblins who, in studying the Brazen Dome, there's some sort of connection there. They're better at guessing when it's going to rise, where the door will open. It's not enough to be a major deal, but they've got some connection to it that just makes them better at handling it.
Like a racial memory type thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right.
Yeah, love it.
Just this tiny little fragment on the Luminarchism. The only thing I really wanted to do is that whilst, as you mentioned, that there are these Luminarchists within the Great Consociate, indeed, arguably the Unfettered League is, as you said, the outgrowth and organisation of the Luminarch movement.
Yes.
The only thing I really wanted to add is that, as of today, there are Luminarchists within the Unfettered League who think the League have become too staid and too organised and have essentially become the enemy. So even within the Unfettered League, there are like fanatic cells of Luminarchists who are causing the League issues as well.
Oh, okay, I like that. Yeah, that fits in very well.
All right, I think.
Oh my god, we've done it.
Have we finished warring? I'm not going to admit, I've run out.
I think we've finished. I think we've finished warring. Hold on, I'm going to kill you and your family. No, I won't.
I don't have any brain bullets left. I don't know what weapons we're using here exactly.
Oh,
well, words, obviously.
Yeah, that's right. It's words. Oh, I know.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned that someone was unsure whether we mean to swear in this podcast or not. So how about this? Fuck you.
I accept that as both description about whether we're going to swear or not, and obviously as a personal attack upon myself.
Also, bitch.
Fair.
I feel bad for saying that.
Yeah.
It's a gendered insult.
It is.
I don't like it. I'm not going to cut it from... I'm going to leave it in
Mm-hmm.
as a lesson to myself for the future. I'm sorry to all women.
Probably for the best in general, honestly, for you.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. That was mean too. So I apologise as well. All right. Well then.
Okay, we've done it.
In the grim darkness of the 21st century, there is only jumping to conclusions.
So in jumping to conclusions, we're going to have just a quick wrap-up and discussion about what we've come up with and perhaps why.
Okay, let's do it.
Yeah. So I was delighted when you said that you're going to be handling magic. It's such a big topic in any world. So when you came armed as you did with so much work already, it was, as I was listening to you, I was like, oh yeah, I want to do something with that. Oh yeah, I want to do something with that. Oh yeah, I really want to do something with that too. It was really good.
Yeah, well, you see, my thought was when I first approached this was Aaron is usually the magic guy. Yeah, a magic man. So I really wanted to come up with something, some ideas and fundamentals that we can work off, because to be honest, magic is not something that I look a lot at or for in fantasy, or certainly not huge and overt magic. And I think that's why sort of made the effort to make it a bit more, like we said before, costly and understated and rare. Yeah.
Well, I mean, we both agreed that's what it would look like in very general terms, but you've narrowed it down to a logical system and agree with my my various challenges, which I very much appreciate.
I think the way that this goes is I think it's going to be rare for us to disagree about the challenges unless there's something egregious, because I think it does kind of sculpt the setting more finely.
Yeah, and I wanted to tie into your idea that it is subtle. So the idea that life is magic, it's just that you're not going to ask Jeff, the bloke down the street, it's like, what is magic? He's not going to say life itself is magic. It's not something that 98% of the people of the world consider magic.
I feel like that, comparison to electricity that we made before is similar. I feel like if I go to any random person and go, please explain electricity to me, they also won't be able to tell me.
And that's no knock on anybody, because there's no reason to know about that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not part of, it's a part of everyday life in terms of we use stuff powered by it, but we don't usually interact with it in its raw form.
Exactly.
Yeah. Lightning? I don't know.
Yeah.
See, I don't know.
I go out of my way to avoid interacting with lightning in my real life, I'll be honest with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I really, really enjoyed the stuff that you sort of put down, especially about the Interbellum Guard.
Guard of the Serpentine Wall.
Yes, of the Serpentine Wall is so good. I feel like it's such an evocative thing. It's an evocative name. And also also I like it as a balancing thing to like the two powers. And in terms of, I think, storytelling as well, it creates more hooks and more places where you can take your story as a GM.
It leads to, instead of these two forces bumping into one another, which is a relatively stable political situation, you've now got this third group, which is ostensibly more dedicated to the truce than either of the two sides are. But with your addition of the crazed elf and her desire for revenge, might actually be the most secretly dedicated to literally blowing everything up.
That's right, yes. And I also just realized that I put two things that can explode in the setting. I'm so sorry.
One is, existential erasure, and the other one is potential boom. We don't really know. You're nice and unobvious about it.
Oh, that's good.
I like when you've got, because the essence of story is conflict. I think I've talked about this before. And when you've got built-in conflicting desires and motivations already within the setting as a whole, it means that as a game master or a storyteller of any sort, as you say, you've got hooks, you've got things to play with. There's already drama and story going on, which makes the existence of more a lot easier to create.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to introduce a little subtly, I suppose, how the Great Consociate administers its growing empire. So I took from the ideas of Republican Rome with its two consuls, a little bit of the Twin Kings of Sparta. So there's
I was actually thinking about the Twin Kings of Sparta when you were talking about that.
So the idea would be that instead of having like governors of various areas, you'd have these two conarchs that have to work together.
Yeah, I think that's really cool.
And we've got this. We keep using the word con, which does, often mean, together and contiguous, that sort of jazz. So the idea of twin conarchs.
Yeah, I think it works. I think it works in the vague linguistics that we're working on here, but also to us as English speakers, I think it makes sense.
I'm not sure exactly what the difference between a blood heir and any other kind of heir is. I just thought it sounded neat.
Sounds awesome. I absolutely love it, yeah.
Right. Well, look, I think we've had a good little chat.
I think we have.
Perhaps
it's gone quite well.
We will go away and thresh through the fields of imagination for some more fable fodder. You don't thresh it. You reap through fields and then you thresh it for grains of deers.
That's why if they gave you a hammer and sickle, you'd pick the hammer and then you couldn't get any grain. And that's why communism failed.
Sure, obviously, because of the iconography. That's the reason.
No, it should have just been sickles. It should have been a sickle and a sickle. You can do it with a hammer. I don't know.
Tool making is kind of one of those basic things, and blacksmithy.
I think you could use a sickle as a hammer. What do you think about that?
I think you could poorly.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think I know enough about tools to work out whether that's why communism failed.
I agree that sickle is much more fun to say than hammer.
And also, I remember where I learned the word sickle, because it was, Asterix comics. It was Get a Fix. Had the sickle, which is good. I love Asterix so much.
Oh yeah.
And also, just to put this on record, communism failed largely because of corruption, but also because of Western interference. Yeah, I'm leaving that in the recording. I'm going to put that at the start and the finish.
I don't disagree. All right.
Anyway, all right.
Thank you for listening to us. We will see you again in episode 2 as we continue to flesh out Heliakon.
My microphone flashed red when I yelled at it, so I'm sorry, microphone.
Give it a pat and calm it down whilst we bugger off. There we go.
I did it. Okay, cool.